Hey, I'm Hubwood and today we are going to take a look at the gaming performance of the 25-watt version of the RTX 2050, which in today's video comes in the brand new Acer Aspire 5 with an i7 1260p and 16GB of DDR4 RAM. I will also publish a complete review of this laptop in a few days, so make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're interested. An important warning up front. This laptop has severe CPU throttling issues, which I was able to fix with installing all the newest drivers, updating the BIOS and using throttle stop to stop the laptop from power throttling the CPU's long-term TDP. The temperatures are still absolutely fine, as you will see in a bit. And not fixing these issues will make most of the games unplayable, as they start to stutter heavily and the GPU would be held back by a lot. I also need to point out that you actually can switch the fan and performance mode of this laptop by pressing Fn+F, which isn't advertised anywhere. And you can't seem to control this via the Acer software, so Acer, what the heck? Of course, all games have been tested using the performance mode and the throttle fix.
Now today's first title was Assassin's Creed Valhalla on low settings, and as you can see here, the frame times were really smooth and the experience was pretty okay.
Using the low preset at 1080p, I saw an average of 51 FPS and a 1% low of 40 FPS. If you are okay with locked 30 FPS, medium would most certainly be an option. But I'm not 100% sure if the 4GB VRAM won't become a problem now and then, because I did have RTX 3050 laptops where in some scenes the VRAM would seem to overflow and the FPS dropped quite a bit. Maybe using medium settings with low textures could solve that issue for good. The second game for today was Anno 1800, which I was testing on medium settings, where it actually already looks pretty good in my opinion. It's kinda difficult to bench a realistic average FPS as it depends a lot on the size of your cities and the zoom level. But it's safe to say that a game like this is absolutely perfectly playable this way. I saw an average of 46 FPS and a 1% low of 17 FPS, which really isn't a problem in a strategy game. Sure, if you zoom in and turn the camera over, it might start to stutter, but that's not the way you would actually play the game. So, next. I was testing control on low settings and DLSS on 720p, resulting in an average FPS of 59 and a 1% low of 34 FPS. Control looks really good even with DLSS activated, as Remedy did an outstanding job implementing it with DLSS 2.0. So I would call this perfectly playable, and if you're okay with less than 60 FPS, you could surely use the medium preset instead and still get good frame rates. In Cyberpunk 2077, I was using the low preset with DLSS on balanced mode at 1080p, resulting in an average of 50 FPS with a 1% low of 32. Frame times were pretty good almost all the time, and I would definitely call this enjoyable. You could surely crank up some more settings and still get away with more than 30 FPS. Considering that this game is really eating performance in modern gaming PCs, I'd call this a respectable result overall. And remember to always double check traffic when crossing a street, children. Thanks, next. Far Cry 6 was running with superb frame times and an average of 54 FPS and a 1% low of 42 using the low preset at 1080p. Considering that the MX550 and the MX570, which are also only using 25 watt but only have 2GB of VRAM but the same chip, they really can't play this game at all, not even at 720p. The RTX 2050 is doing pretty okay here, even though a lockable 60 FPS would have been really nice. But for that you'd have to lower the resolution, I guess. Nonetheless, it's absolutely playable that way for a single player game, even if it's a first-person shooter. I was using the Pro settings in Fortnite, meaning epic view distance and everything else set to the lowest at 1080p and DirectX 11, even though the performance mode is of course an option as well. However, I saw an average of 74 FPS with a 1% low of 33 FPS, which surely could be optimized if you play 2 or 3 matches until the game loaded all the shaders, etc. at least once. From my experience, that definitely helps. Keep in mind that Fortnite is actually getting more demanding with almost each season though. At least it has been like that for the last few years, as it was absolutely possible to get 120 FPS with these settings on a GTX 750 Ti and a 10-year-old 4-core i5 a few years back. I was playing Forza Horizon 5 on medium settings at 1080p and saw an average of around 80 FPS and a 1% low of 66 FPS, which definitely qualifies as perfectly playable. You could actually use high settings and cap the FPS at 60 to optimize the visuals. The game ran really great and I would call this a perfect experience. I was using high settings for GTA 5 at 1080p and saw an average of 100 FPS and a 1% low of 66 with a very flat frame time graph, as you can see here. For some reason the GPU wasn't utilizing the full 25 watt for some reason. Maybe it's because we are actually running into some kind of CPU bottleneck here, and the CPU seemed to be able to pull a lot more wattage compared to the other games I've tested. However, needless to say that this is more than perfect both visually and FPS wise, so let's see what's next. I was using DLSS balanced for Warzone combined with 1080p and low settings, resulting in an average of 74 FPS and a 1% low of 56 FPS, and actually pretty good frame times. If you're okay with 60 FPS, you could crank up a few settings here and there and tinker around a bit. But most people would probably want as much performance as possible. However, it is playable and it's kinda enjoyable. And last but not least, I was using the high preset without Hairworks for The Witcher 3 and saw an average of 62 FPS and a 1% low of 37 FPS, which is of course pretty perfectly playable at 1080p. Capping the FPS at 60 would probably help to further stabilize the frame rate and reduce The Witcher 3 typical FPS hiccups. By the way, in Firestrike, the laptop was achieving a total score of 7,993 with a graphics score of 9,047, which is about what a GTX 970 for desktops can achieve, and a physics score of 22,681. So overall, I would say that the RTX 2050 25W is what the MX 550 and the MX 570 should have been like. A very efficient budget GPU with 4GB of VRAM and DLSS for small and thin and light laptops. It allows you to play all the available games with 30 or even 60 FPS or more at 1080p. Again, if you want to find out more about this laptop, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check that bell so you won't miss the full review in a few days. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye bye and tschüss.